Welcome to Section 8, where we're going to kick off a fairly detailed conversation on unit loading devices, also known as ULDs. As we'll see in a few moments, there is sometimes confusion over what a ULD is and isn't. It's a much broader definition than one might think. A unit loading device, a ULD, is a pallet or container that is used to load freight, luggage, and/or mail onto an aircraft. This first bullet point alleviates some of the potential confusion that was alluded to a moment ago, because it clearly states that a ULD is not just a container, but also a pallet, basically anything that holds cargo, luggage, and/or mail. ULDs are considered to be aircraft parts and are subject to safety and airworthiness requirements. We see that in our second bullet point. As a point of interest, there are more than 900,000 aircraft ULDs in service globally. And because ULDs are considered to be aircraft parts, last bullet, technical and operational standards for ULD usage are found in the IATA ULD regulations. Of course, we spoke of IATA in previous sections. They're involved in ULDs as well. Because we have a couple of images on this slide, we can stop and take a look and start to talk about what these ULDs are. The first, on the upper left-hand side, is an interesting image because basically we're looking at the fuselage of an aircraft cut in half. We can see seats up on the main deck and below deck some ULDs. The one on the right, for example, being an LD3. We'll notice that these ULDs are somewhat contoured to the circular nature of the fuselage, making more use of the cubic feet capacity of the lower deck of the aircraft. Another example, on the right-hand side, a much bigger ULD contoured as well. We'll note that there's luggage in there, but there could be cargo also. And then on the lower left, in what is clearly a cargo aircraft, some oversized pieces on what are ULDs. We'll also notice the rollers on the floor of the main deck of the aircraft to make it easier to maneuver, move, and position ULDs within an aircraft. There are a bunch of advantages inherent to using unit loading devices, many of which are for the airline, but also those benefits trickle down to the freight forwarder and the importer. What we're talking about really is the unitization of cargo, loose pieces being put on a pallet or into a container. With that said, that unitization of cargo reduces handling and potential loss or damage to goods, because the carrier or the forwarder or the trucking company that's moving freight isn't dealing with loose pieces. It is one big unitized piece. Once a ULD is built up, as it's oftentimes called, one will experience quicker turn times for loading and offloading of aircraft. Another feature, not mentioned here, if there are adverse weather conditions out on a tarmac, ULDs will help protect against that as well, especially if pallets have plastic covering and cargo nets over them. Or the unitized ULDs, the enclosed ULDs, offer automatic protection. Third sub-bullet here, ULDs help to optimize the weight and space capacity of an aircraft. There is an art to building up ULDs, certainly an art to building up pallets in a way that doesn't compromise the integrity of cartons on the pallet, meaning the cartons don't get crushed, and contoured to the circular nature of the fuselage of the aircraft. That's a definite art and skill, as is the loading of enclosed ULDs like the one we see on the right. One thing we can point out about the ULD on the right is that it is transparent. Sometimes that's okay, sometimes that isn't okay, depending on what's in the ULD. Either way, ULDs definitely help to optimize weight and space capacity of the aircraft, and in our last sub-bullet, that facilitates the weight and balance requirements of an aircraft. This is an especially salient point because just like we spoke of in our ocean module, where ships need to be balanced, the container distribution needs to be balanced, that is especially so on aircraft. One can easily envision a scenario where 3 giant pallet positions of ball bearings are at the back of an aircraft, and towards the front of the aircraft are pallets of ping pong balls. That's not a good weight and balance distribution. Once again, the buildup of pallets, the buildup of ULDs is an art and really a question of safety and security of the aircraft, not just the revenue potential of the aircraft. Continuing on with the discussion on the advantages to airlines, forwarders, and importers of using ULDs, Modern ULDs are designed to create what is referred to as a favorable ratio of tier weight to cube utilization. We should recall from our ocean module that tier weight is the actual weight of the container. An ocean container, but in our case, the actual ULD, the weight of the ULD. Cube utilization is really making the most of the space in a ULD pursuant to the space limitations of the aircraft that the ULD is going into. Cube utilization is making the most use of space. In other words, sub-bullet, ULDs are lightweight now, but capable of handling large quantities of cargo. On the right-hand side, we see some examples of ULDs. We spoke of this in a previous section, where the ULDs are contoured to the circular nature of the fuselage, but that they butt up against one another in the middle to maximize the space utilization, the cube utilization of the aircraft. Of course, when one uses ULDs, there's an element of enhanced security and control over cargo. It's not a guarantee to avoid theft, but ULDs have a tendency to make theft a little bit more difficult. Final trade tip on this slide: both airlines and freight forwarders can load or build up ULDs. We used the term build up previously. It's just creating a cargo configuration on a pallet or in a container. This is an important point, especially for U.S. importers, because we need to know not only who is handling our cargo, but who is ultimately responsible for building up pallets or using other ULDs to load onto an aircraft. We've said this a couple of times. The airlines, upon receiving loose cargo, are very, very likely to build up the ULDs themselves. Freight forwarders, especially the larger freight forwarders, have the physical plant, have the warehouse capability nearby an airport to receive loose cargo from overseas vendors and build up pallets themselves and tender those pallets, tender those ULDs directly to the airline. If we are a U.S. importer, we want to know if our freight forwarder is indeed building up ULDs. If they are, it's usually a signal that they're a larger freight forwarder that might have enhanced buying power from the airlines and maybe some operational sophistication that other forwarders don't possess. Let's round out this section with a real-world example entitled Cargo Security and the Use of ULDs. You are a supply chain security consultant that has been called in by a major U.S. importer of smartphones and consumer electronics. The importer sources smartphones from a number of countries and is experiencing a serious theft problem for air freight shipments coming out of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Let's start by saying that Brazil is not unique to cargo theft. It goes on in every country around the world. This is simply a real-world example. Second paragraph. The importer was originally moving smartphones as loose cargo. The vendor in Brazil was tendering loose cartons to the airline, but upon suffering heavy losses, began using slip sheets with black shrink wrap. A slip sheet is just a heavy, thick piece of cardboard that is used in place of a wooden pallet upon which cartons can be placed. However, the slip sheets were probably a good idea. The black shrink wrap actually made matters worse because the black wrap was a signal to thieves that the cargo was likely of high value. That's a very real consideration out in the cargo world. There are multiple hundreds of examples where random thefts occur just because pallets are black wrapped. Last sentence, second paragraph. You have been called in to discuss the merits of using unit loading devices. What should you tell your new client? Third paragraph. Whereas the importer will have to work with their forwarder to decide on the type and size of ULD to use, you can emphasize that all ULDs offer the ability to secure cargo in an enclosed structure. By using a non-transparent ULD, the importer will also be able to maintain the anonymity of its contents. Finally, ULDs are bulky in size and as such are more difficult to transport without being detected. There are a couple of points here. Number one, as an importer, if we're dealing with high-value cargo susceptible to theft, we have to work with the forwarders and the airlines to create a security program. ULDs offer enclosure. The non-transparent ULDs offer anonymity. We saw a picture a few slides back of a transparent ULD. That might defeat the purpose of what we're trying to achieve here. Needless to say, even the smallest of ULDs, an LD3, as a good example, about 160 cubic feet, they're still bulky in size and more difficult to conceal in terms of a theft opportunity. Last paragraph, Ultimately, you should stress that U.S. importers of high-value cargo should take a layered approach to cargo security, where the use of ULDs is but one element in a series of theft deterrents. That's only one sentence, but it's a pretty important one. The idea of a layered approach: limited physical access to cargo, limiting people's access to cargo, physical plant deterrence, fenced-in areas for high-value cargo, biometric access to high cargo areas, strict process control, strict policies, background checks on employees. These are all elements of a layered approach to cargo security. ULDs definitely play a role, but they're one element of that layered approach. That will be it for Section 8. Upon our return, we will continue with our discussion on unit loading devices and show a few more examples of what they look like.